In the previous video, we took a look at using a function called fgetc to be able to read data from a file in PHP. The code that we wrote in that previous video is exactly what I have here on my screen right now. It's a good starting point for moving forward and talking about our next function. The problem we had with the fgets function was that it read an entire line of data at a time. There are times when that wouldn't be a problem, but in our particular case, where we basically have data written out to a file and each line represents multiple fields of that data, the fgets function doesn't do a lot of good for us because we don't need to read the entire, we don't want to read the entire line in as one large thing. We need to be able to take each line and subdivide it in a way. So the fgets function just wasn't exactly the right solution for what we were needing. The function I want to show you in this file does move a little bit more in a good direction for us though, and that's a function called fgetc. If I, here in the previous code, same thing we had from the last video, simply change the place where we were calling fgets to fgetc. If we take a look at that in the browser and refresh, you can get a little bit of an idea of what fgetc does. While fgets, which was basically from a file get a string, if it got an entire line, fgetc, which is from a file get a character, you can kind of see that that's exactly what the fgetc function does. Whenever we call the fgetc function, what it actually gives us back is a single character from the file. Every character is read. It doesn't matter if it's letter, number, punctuation, space, even invisible characters, things we can't typically see like new line characters and tabs, are actually read using the fgetc function. So in my file, same setup as what I had before, assuming the file opens and there's no errors, I say while we're not at the end of our data file. Then what I do is I say, using the fgetc function, read from that file. What's read there, what I'm calling line, is not really a line at all, it's actually a character that's being read. What I'm then doing is I'm saying if that individual character isn't blank, and in this case none of those are really considered blank, everything is something when you're talking about a character. Right. What we do is we take that character and we print it out as a new line. So there I've renamed my line variable to make it a little bit more appropriate for the unit of data that we're actually reading. And again, if we look in the browser, this is what we see. Each individual character read in and then output into the browser window as a line item in our unordered list. That's not actually a very useful way to use these individual characters. If I wanted to work with individual characters this way, what I might need to do is group characters together into fields, essentially. By being able to group characters into fields, I could come up with something very much like what we had previously when we were using the fgets function. Let's see if we can just sort of get back to that point. I think what I might do is before my while loop, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it line. And I'm going to start it off as just an empty string. Then, inside the while loop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an if statement. And in this if statement, what I'm going to do is check a character that's been read. Let me go ahead and move the line that actually reads the character to before that if statement. Okay, so I want to check the character that's just been read, and what I'm going to do is if that character is a new line character, then there's one thing we want to do and something else we want to do if it isn't. If it isn't a new line character, then what I'm going to say is append that character to our line. So use the line variable as an accumulator, basically. Keep building up character after character after character in that line variable. And we do that when the new line, when the character variable is not a new line. When the character variable is a new line, that's basically when it's time for us to actually print out what we've found. So let me move my line where I echo out the list item. I'm going to move that to inside my if statement that checks to see if character is a new line. Here I don't actually want to print out the character, I want to print out the entire line itself. The other thing I want to do in here is clear out my line variable. If we found a new line, that means we've basically finished getting all the characters for one individual line. And I only want to actually get the new character, what I'm doing here, when it's not a new line. Maybe something like that. Let's take a look at it in the browser and see how that works. There we are. It's essentially the same thing that we had previously when we were doing the fgets statement, except now we're doing it reading each individual character at a time. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than what we had previously when we were doing fgets with this if statement where we're trying to detect what character we're reading. But even though that's more complicated, that is also in this particular case an advantage. The reason it's an advantage is it means that we can actually react differently based on different individual characters that we read in from the file. That's something that wasn't really an option when we were using fgetc. We could, for example, here actually have it react differently whenever it detects a tab character. The tab character was the character that we inserted into our data file, indicating a separation between one field and the next. So this should theoretically let me go and create a table where I display each one of the different fields of the color data in its own column of a table. Let's give that a try. I'm going to start by changing my unordered list into table tags. I'm also going to go ahead and throw in a table row up here at the top of the table where I'll put in headers to identify each one of the different columns. Now that I have my headers, essentially what the name of the game becomes is instead of down here printing out a list item, what I'm going to want to do instead is print out table rows, TR tags. So let's see, maybe I'll start here inside the while loop by printing out a starting TR tag, a bit like that, and probably somewhere down towards the end we're going to need to print out a closing TR tag. So each one of the individual characters or each one of the individual fields or lines that we print out will essentially become a part of a table row. What we then need to do is as we go through and actually read the characters, we are going to need to detect whenever we run into a tab character and use that as an indication that we're actually splitting one piece of data from the next, one field from the next. I hesitated there because I think I actually probably want to put this outside that while loop for right now. Let's see where we can get. I'm going to start here by reading in the character, just like we already have. If the character we read is a new line, then that means that we're done. In the case of a table, what is it we want to do when we're done? What we would want to do if we have finished reading a line is finish off one row and then start the next row. So that's going to be something like finish one table row, start the next table row. It would also mean we're going to need to flush out any variables that we're using. So our line variable, for example, at that point would need to go blank. That line variable itself is probably not actually going to be all that useful to us at this point. I think instead of calling it line, I'm going to go ahead and rename that field. So let me make that change in both of those two places that I've touched so far. Turns out I already had the line right there. Right? This line I'm not sure if I even need. I'm just going to wipe it out for right now. And let's move forward and see where else we get. Let's make this field. So as we're reading through our data, if we find a new line, we finish off one table row, we start the next table row. That's the idea. Let me take and move this table row outside the while loop because I don't think I'm going to want to do that over and over again. The other thing I'm going to need to work with in here is what happens if we detect a tab character. So let's put in a closing curly brace, else if, and let's check and see if the character we've read is equal to a tab. What is it then that we would want to do if we do find a tab? Finding a tab would basically mean that we're done with an individual field. Being done with a field would mean that that field could be printed out as a table data cell. So let's do echo TD tags with the value of the field between them. That would also mean at that point we want to clear out the field, get ready to build the new field. So let me do that there. Same thing we did whenever we detected a new line. It's a bit of an experiment, but let's see how that actually works. If I jump back over to my browser, it doesn't look like it's working very well at all, does it? Where did I go wrong? Well, off the bat, I'm not seeing anything that appears to be wrong. Let me take a look at the browser. In the browser, if I actually look at the code that's being generated, what I see is a bunch of empty TRs, a bunch of empty rows. The number of rows that are appearing inside that table do look to me to be approximately the right number based on how many colors there are in the file, but there's no actual TDs appearing anywhere. Where are my TDs? Well, the TDs should be printed out right here. That looks to me to be an invalid echo statement. I don't see anything wrong with that. What I'm wondering might be the problem is that those should only be printed or would only be printed when the character that separates one field from another is a tab. Maybe I should look at my actual data file itself. Here's my actual data file stored in my browser, and right away I see something wrong here. What are these strange spaces up here at the beginning? Over here separating one field and the next, I'm not seeing a tab, I'm seeing individual spaces. I can tell those are spaces because when I hit the arrow keys, I can go through them one at a time. What I think happened was I edited this file in a different editor, and when I did, that editor may have been set to use spaces instead of tabs. Applications like this, scripts like this, can be very, very sensitive to the actual format of the data. So let me go through, clean up this data file, get rid of the spaces, put proper tabs in, and see how that works. There we are. Doesn't look like I did a whole lot, but I actually went through, erased the spaces off the beginning of each line, and everywhere that I had a single or two spaces before, I've now replaced with a tab. A single hit of the left or right arrow key on the keyboard seems to jump me across that tab the way you would expect. Let me jump over to the browser now and see if this works. There we go. Still not perfect, but it sure looks like it's getting a whole lot closer, doesn't it? Now I'm properly reading the actual color's name. It looks like the red value and the green value are turning out. Let's see, for the first one that should be DD and E0. Let's look at the data file. Yes, DD and E0 are the red and green values for that first color. I'm losing my CF over here, the blue color. Let's take a look at the code that we wrote and see if we can figure out where that one's going. I think I see the problem here. When we get to the end of a line, we detect a new line character, but there's no tab at the end. Since there's no tab character at the end, we're never actually outputting the field that's been built in that particular case. So let me output the field inside a set of TDs when I detect a new line character the same way I do when I detect a tab, like that. So whenever we detect a new line, we go ahead and output the field that's just been completed. Then we finish off the row, start the next row, and flush out the field variable to start reading the first field on the next line. Again, let's take a look in the browser. Eureka! It looks like it's working just fine now. So definitely quite a bit more complicated than what we had done before when we were using the fgetc statement, but also pretty powerful advantage here using the fgetc function. Using fgetc and being able to read data from my file one character at a time allowed me to actually examine and have the script react differently based on exactly what character was found. So we were able to, in this case, do something like read in our data and actually be able to split it up into individual fields to be displayed in a table, or any other case where we might need to be able to use each of those individual pieces of data. Overall, though, certainly not a simple solution. So what we'll do in our next video is we'll take a look at another file reading function that PHP makes available to us that will help give us the same advantages of what we're getting here using fgetc, but will let us do it a little bit more simply, a little bit more on the easy end of things like we had when we were using fgets.